most of the mid-century modern architecture started. It was after the war. People wanted new houses. As Gina's mother told me many times, they were forward-looking. They didn't want to live in the past. The war was over. They were filled with the feeling that, we've got to move on. We've got to be modern. First two modern houses in Pound Ridge are built on this hill. One in 1940 and one immediately after. If you look at it per capita, there are more modern houses in Pound Ridge than there are in New Canaan.
A lot of people who were interested in modern houses came to Pound Ridge for a variety of reasons.
And in the 50s, of course, there was a tremendous move for clean lines in architecture, in home design, in dress, and in attitude. And of course, we were drawn to people who had the same ideas, and there were many who had settled in Pound Ridge.
Creative types being the trailblazers here with the modern movement is that their friends knew, the Federicos moved up to Pound Ridge, well, let's go take a look at it. And it's a very likable place, as we know.
So people were really drawn to the spirit of Pound Ridge, to the cheap land, because of the longer commute to the city and its ruggedness. The land was really rough. There were certain developers like Malawista and Joe Yates who got those large tracts of flat land. But it also was a place that was available.
And they moved up here, I guess, to get away from the city and to start a new life, because I guess the land was fairly cheap, and it was a very, very quiet farm town with an artist community.
I think there were restrictions in certain communities, and Pound Ridge was a very open community, which is part of the richness of living there.
So these were the people that drew us. We knew many of them from the advertising business. There was Bob Cage, of course, the Federicos, the Antipits, the Olsons, Burbrow, at least a dozen or more that were friends that we had known from business and kept up those relationships while we were here.
A lot of those people became friends. It was a notable handful because these were well-known people in their fields.
There was always a lot of artistic activity in the house, and the quality of light was really important. And one thing that's great about the house is the way the light is in the room and the way the house sits on top of the hill, where you're sort of in the middle of the canopy of the trees that surround it.
This is an unusual house. This is not like some of the mid-century moderns, because it of course predates by a good number of years, at least 10 years. I think of it as more cottage modern, because you've got clapboard. What modern house has clapboard? And double hung windows. That's kind of ridiculous. You never have that in a modern house, but that's the state of windows at that time.
My mother was an artist who did Broadway show posters. She did the iconic Fiorello poster of Fiorello dancing over the skyline of New York, among other things.
It was very important to them to have the house be part of the land and not to stand out on it, but have it be hugging the landscape rather than dominating it.
The house was set into the property. It was very inviting. There was plenty of land around it, visually.
We were always very proud when a house was finished. And people would say, "It's amazing that you found that piece of land. The house fits perfectly on it." When actually you brought in big machines to change the land and make it work for you.
I became entranced with Vuko style because I'm a landscape designer. I had been hired by a family who owned a Toshkovich house on Winterbottom Lane, Roger and Sharon Goodman. And I fell in love with his architecture as I was doing their landscape planning and installation. And so we were, very anxious to have a Toshkovich house.
The land was everything. And it was also very important to point out to the clients the limitations of sites they were so excited about.
There were large oaks here, and that's what we really particularly liked about the property. And also the other thing that we liked about it was that it has preserve all the way around it. And you feel like you have 20 acres instead of just 2. you know, his houses have a lot of openness and a lot of glass, and I really like that. That really made everything, you can see the inside and the outside are just all together.
It was something like the early Powers house, where you see the stone walls were not only separate from the house, but also part of the exterior wall below the window. In these early houses, which he did, that were more in the spirit of mid-century modernism.
We first started talking about the possibility of designing a house for us. He had, I think at the time, built 2. So ours was his 3rd house.
Even as he went on to do the houses that were more in the spirit of Meyer and Guathmy and Corbusier, the white houses, stone continued to be very important to him.
He called this his center hall colonial, which I thought was kind of amusing because it is a center hall colonial, but not in the traditional sense.
Vuko went on and of course has built many more houses since. Our house was probably a little more subtle than some of his later houses, which tended to be white and stark, and our house was stone and wood siding, and so it kind of blended in with the wood. But as I say, we never really thought that much of it as being a quote modern house. It was just a comfortable house that we liked very much.
So I think in the end they were looking for something of architectural interest, good and interesting materials, and something that they felt comfortable living in